They said Alexander the Great could not be killed by any man. And yet, one warm night in Babylon, the man who had conquered the known world sat sweating in his palace, his breath shallow, his body trembling. His men whispered outside his chambers. His empire, the largest the world had ever seen, waited for its king to rise. But Alexander never rose again. Was it fate that struck him down at the height of his power, or something far darker? It was June 323 BCE. The air in Babylon was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked dust. Inside the royal palace, the king had just returned from a night of drinking with his generals. Babylon was no ordinary city. It was the center of the world now, the capital of Alexander's vast empire stretching from Greece to India. The night had been one of celebration. Alexander had been making plans for something even bigger, a campaign to conquer Arabia. His generals had gathered, wine flowed like rivers, and the music of flutes echoed through the hall. Then, sometime after the feast, Alexander cried out in pain. The sources disagree about what happened next. Some claim he drank a goblet of unmixed wine, screamed as if stabbed, and collapsed. Others say the sickness came gradually, a slow fever that stole his strength day by day. But all agree on one thing. Alexander's decline was terrifyingly swift. Picture the scene. The palace courtyard filled with anxious soldiers, their bronze armor gleaming in the torchlight. The king's warhorse Bucephalus had long since died, but his men still loved him as if he were a god. Inside, the conqueror lay sweating, barely able to speak. His generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, Perdiccas, came to his bedside. They were more than generals now. They were ambitious men who had tasted power, who saw the empire splitting apart like a ripe pomegranate. And there was one more man, Antipater, the regent of Macedon, father of Cassander, who had long quarreled with Alexander. Some say Alexander had summoned him to Babylon to face charges of abuse of power. Antipater never came, but his sons did. And here lies the dark suspicion. Did they come not just to serve, but to end the life of their king? In the dimly lit chamber, Alexander's friends watched him weaken. They offered prayers to the gods, sacrifices to Asclepius, the god of healing. But no cure came. For 6 days, the king lay silent, unable to speak above a whisper. Yet, according to legend, he still recognized his soldiers when they filed past him one last time, kissing his hand and weeping. Then, on the evening of the 11th day, the greatest conqueror in history was gone. No wound, no battle, no glory. Just a silent death in a dark room. But here's where the story twists into conspiracy. The body of Alexander did not rot for days after his death. To the ancient world, this was proof of his divinity, but to modern scholars, it raises a terrifying possibility. Could Alexander have been poisoned with something so slow-acting that he remained alive, paralyzed but conscious, until his body finally gave up? Theories abound. Some claim white hellebore, a deadly plant, was slipped into his wine. Others suggest strychnine or even poison from the Styx River, a mythical substance the Greeks believed could kill even the gods. And who would have had the courage to do it? Perhaps those closest to him. Ptolemy, who would soon take Egypt for himself. Seleucus, who would seize the eastern provinces. Cassander, who would later kill Alexander's wife Roxana and son Alexander IV, erasing the bloodline of the great king. These men stood at his bedside. They heard his last whispers. They carried his body out of Babylon. And when it was over, they divided his empire like vultures over a fallen lion. If this was not poison, it was a miracle of timing. But history is rarely so neat. Somewhere in the shadows of that warm Babylonian night, a hand may have stirred a goblet, a quiet bargain may have been struck, and the fate of the world changed forever. Because when Alexander died, his dream of a single, united empire died with him. And perhaps, that was exactly what some of his friends wanted. The question is not just how Alexander died. The real question is, who benefited most from his death? And when you look closely, the answer is as chilling as it is obvious. Babylon was silent the morning after Alexander's death, but only on the surface. Inside the palace walls, a storm was brewing. Alexander's generals, men who had fought side by side with him for more than a decade, now stood in a circle, staring at the empty throne. None of them wept. None of them spoke of grief. Instead, they began to whisper about the future. The conqueror's body still lay unburied. His wife Roxana, pregnant with his child, was watched closely. His half-brother Aridaeus, mentally unstable, wandered the halls in confusion. The question hung over them like a sword. Who would rule the empire now? It is said that Perdiccas, Alexander's most trusted general, stepped forward first. He took the king's signet ring and declared himself regent, protector of the unborn heir. But others did not agree. Ptolemy, the clever one, who had been with Alexander since childhood, had different plans. He knew the empire could not hold together. He wanted Egypt, its wealth, its ancient temples, its strong borders. Seleucus, quiet but ambitious, looked eastward toward Persia and beyond. And Cassander, who had always hated Alexander, saw a chance to claim Macedon itself. Within days, the city was divided into factions. The air was thick with suspicion. At night, torches burned late into the darkness as secret councils were held. But before the empire could be carved apart, there was one thing left to decide: what to do with Alexander's body. In the ancient world, the burial of a king was not just a ritual. It was a statement of power. Whoever buried Alexander would inherit the divine blessing of the gods. Perdiccas wanted the body returned to Macedon, to be buried in the royal tombs at Aegae. It would send a message that Alexander's line still ruled and that the empire remained united. But Ptolemy had other plans. One night, under the cover of darkness, a funeral procession left Babylon. It carried Alexander's body not toward Macedon, but toward Egypt. When Perdiccas learned of this, he saw it for what it was, a challenge. Ptolemy was not just stealing a body. He was stealing the symbol of kingship itself. This is where the story turns bloody. Perdiccas gathered his army and marched on Egypt. It was civil war, the first of the wars of the Diadochi, the wars of the successors. For 3 years, blood ran across the empire. Alexander's dream of unity burned away in fire and betrayal. Cities were besieged. Generals turned on each other like wolves. And as the war raged, more shadows fell over the memory of Alexander. Roxana, the queen, gave birth to a son, Alexander IV. For a brief moment, the empire had an heir. But Cassander had no intention of allowing the boy to grow into a king. He first murdered Roxana, then smothered the child in secret. The blood of Alexander's line was wiped from the earth. Do you see the pattern? Every man who stood around Alexander's deathbed gained from his passing. Ptolemy gained Egypt and kept it. Seleucus built a vast eastern empire. Cassander ruled Macedon and made sure no heir would challenge him. Perdiccas tried to hold the empire together, but even he was killed by his own officers when the wars turned against him. And so, what Alexander built with the sword was undone by the whisper of poison. Was this all an accident? A natural fever that just happened to strike the king at the exact moment his generals were ready to divide the world? Or was it a plot, a silent agreement among men who knew that if Alexander lived, their own ambitions would never come true? There is one chilling clue that survives from antiquity. A later writer claimed that Iolaus, Alexander's cupbearer, delivered the fatal drink. Iolaus was Antipater's nephew, the same Antipater who had refused Alexander's summons to Babylon, the same Antipater whose family would benefit the most from the king's death. It is said that, for years after, Alexander's followers would pour wine on Iolaus' grave as if he were a hero, or a man who had done the gods' will by ending a king who had begun to see himself as a god. But if Alexander's death was murder, it was not just one man's crime. It was the first great assassination that changed the fate of the world. Because the empire Alexander built, the roads, the cities, the vision of a united world, might have endured if he had lived. Instead, it shattered. And from its ruins rose the kingdoms of the successors, Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Asia, Antigonid Macedon. The world Alexander dreamed of never came to pass. But there is still one more mystery. What if Alexander knew? Some say that on his deathbed, when asked to whom he left his empire, he whispered, "To the strongest." Was that the answer of a man defeated by fate, or a man who saw the knives in the shadows and chose to let the wolves tear each other apart after he was gone? And if there was poison, where did it come from? In the mountains of Arcadia, in the heart of Greece, there was a river that terrified even the bravest men. Its waters were black, bitter, and cold as death. The ancients called it the Styx, the very river that, in myth, separated the land of the living from the underworld. It was said that the gods swore their oaths upon this river, and that to break such an oath meant death. The water was so feared that no animal dared drink from it. Shepherds told stories of goats who had done so and dropped dead where they stood. Now imagine a substance so toxic that even the gods feared it, distilled from this river, carried across lands and deserts, brought all the way to Babylon in a small, sealed container. Some ancient writers claim this is exactly what killed Alexander the Great. The theory is as chilling as it is poetic. The water of the Styx was said to corrode metal, so it had to be carried in a hoof, a hollow mule's hoof, sealed with wax. It could not touch iron, could not be tasted without death. And yet, somehow, this legendary poison made its way into the king's wine. Was it real? Modern scientists have investigated the legend. Some believe the myth could point to a real substance, perhaps a naturally occurring bacterial toxin, or a rare alkaloid from plants that grew only near the Styx. Such a poison could have paralyzed Alexander slowly, leaving him alive but unable to move or speak for days, exactly as the sources describe. Picture the scene one last time. Alexander, lying in the great palace of Babylon, drenched in sweat. His generals watching, their faces masks of stone. His lips moving faintly, perhaps forming the name of the one he suspected. But no sound comes. His body is alive, but he is trapped inside, unable to give an order, unable to name an heir, unable to stop what is coming. Outside, Babylon holds its breath. The army waits for its king to appear on the balcony, as he always did after an illness, to show them he still lives. Instead, the days drag on. The soldiers grow restless. And then, the word spreads, Alexander is dead. The world collapses overnight. The empire begins to crack like thin ice. The men who may have killed him now rise to power. Ptolemy takes Egypt and becomes pharaoh. Seleucus builds a kingdom stretching to the Indus. Cassander takes Macedon and erases Alexander's bloodline. Lysimachus seizes Thrace. The dream of a single, united world dies in fire and war. But there is one more layer to this story. Centuries later, when Roman emperors ruled the world, when Alexandria had become a shining jewel of the Mediterranean, pilgrims still came searching for Alexander's body. Julius Caesar saw it. So did Augustus. They bowed before his golden coffin. And then it vanished. Some say the tomb lies hidden beneath modern Alexandria, sealed by rulers who feared its power. Others claim it was destroyed, that the conqueror who thought himself a god was finally erased by time. But perhaps, just perhaps, the tomb still waits. And inside lies the body of a man who might still carry traces of the greatest murder mystery in history. If Alexander was poisoned, if science could test his bones, we might know at last who killed him, and why. But maybe that is why it remains hidden. Because some secrets are too dangerous for the world to know. Imagine, for a moment, if tomorrow morning archaeologists announced that they had found Alexander's tomb, and that inside was proof that his own friends had betrayed him. Would we still call him Alexander the Great? Or would we finally admit that the greatest empire the world had ever seen was built not just on conquest, but on the quiet clink of a poisoned cup? And so the mystery endures. The wine is long gone. The men who drank it are dust. But somewhere, perhaps beneath the streets of Alexandria, the king still waits. Maybe one day we will look into his face again and learn the truth. Until then, the question haunts history like a ghost. Did Alexander the Great die a king or a victim of murder?